All right, you guys, I've been doing some thinking, and I believe League is in the worst place it's ever been in since like beta. And the main question I want to answer before I even get into the video is, why is it still popular then? Why do people still play it? And I think the reason for that is because of the professional scene. If anything has a professional scene, it will attract players. Look at baseball. Baseball is the most boring thing ever, and that's coming from someone who's played baseball from elementary school up till high school. Baseball is extremely boring, but there were variations of it that were pretty fun. Like, me and my friends made some different games where we played 2v2, and that was actually a lot of fun because there would actually be action happening nonstop. Whereas in the actual game of baseball, when it's 9v9, there is very little action happening. And in general, the game is just boring, but it still draws people to watch because it has a professional scene where people are making a lot of money. And I believe that's the reason why people still play baseball. And I think in League, it's pretty much the same thing where there's an established pro circuit and there's a pretty large professional scene. So that by itself will attract players to the game. And Riot doesn't disclose their player-based numbers anymore. I think there's a reason for that. They're probably very embarrassed by the fact that they have less players now. That's the only reason why they wouldn't show their player base, and it really doesn't have much competition in its market. There's really only one other MOBA that can compete, which is Dota 2, because it's sponsored by Valve and they can put a bunch of money into tournaments, and they were able to create a Dota 2 competitive scene. But I believe Dota 2 has a lot of problems that they're not really addressing, and I feel like it's never really gonna be able to surpass League because of those problems, which I might get into in another video. There's a lot of stuff I could talk about with Dota 2. Mainly in Dota 2, I think games are too long. The reporting system in Dota 2 is absolutely horrendous. So League doesn't really have much competition, and they're still managing to not grow their player base. So why is that? I want to take a trip down memory lane back to season 1, where I achieved rank 1 with Teemo. And the reason why this is such a crazy feat was because there was about 2 other Teemo players that were not even close to anywhere near my rank. I think I was 2400 MMR at rank 1. And I think the next closest Teemo player was like 1900, which would be the difference today between like rank 1 challenger and like platinum 1, I think. And so I was using a strategy that literally no one else was using. Even those other Teemo players that I talked about were not using my strategy. They were going full AP Teemo, and I was not. I was going an on-hit hybrid version of Teemo where I would split push. And since I was the only one doing that strategy and making it work, it was weird to me that they completely gutted that strategy based on what one player did. It made no sense to me. My thought process was, if everyone started abusing my strategy because it was so good, then I could see them maybe nerfing certain aspects of it that were overpowered. But I was the only one playing it. And so in one patch, which I like to call the anti-Rain Man patch, they not only nerfed Teemo's mushroom damage completely, they also nerfed Madred's razors for laning. And this version of Madred's razor is actually an updated version. The older version was a cloth armor and longsword and some gold, and it turned into an item that gave you armor, and then it had a passive chance to instantly kill minions. Apparently it used to be 1500 damage to minions, which that was like the very early version of it, I guess. Like that was like pre-beta or something, I don't even know. But the one I remember and the one I was using was 15% chance to deal 500 damage to minions. Now, the cool thing about this effect was it benefited from lifesteal. So if you had a Doran's Blade and you last hit a minion with the proc, you would get like 50 or 60 lifesteal back. So you could sustain a lot of the harder lanes like Pantheon, for example, or like GP, ones that had really high harass damage. And so in my opinion, it was a really cool playstyle. I really enjoyed it. And it was a strategy that really no one was using. And to this day, I don't really necessarily think it was overpowered as much as I was just really good at the strategy. And there was a lot of people that had other strategies that they were really good at. Like the first example for me that comes into mind was Westrice's Akali, where like he was the only person playing Akali, yet he was able to climb to high elo with it. And do I think Akali was necessarily broken at the time? Not necessarily. I think it was more the fact that Westrice was just so good at Akali. Fast forward to today, and even though there's been so many changes that have happened, I believe they've all narrowed the game down to this very narrow point where you can only play a very few selection of champions with a very few selection of playstyles. And I think the main problem with Aerie is that all you have to do to make it work is you literally just have to throw out an auto attack and you do a bunch of damage to your target, and it's on a really low cooldown. And it also procs off abilities as well. So champions like Pantheon, not only is his Q doing tons of damage, but then Aerie also does more damage on top of the Q, so it makes his laning phase even more repressive. And so a lot of champions that before had trouble with Pantheon literally cannot go in a lane against Pantheon. I think Conquer has the same issue where there are champions that are just really strong in the early game, and Conquer makes them even stronger. Another issue with Conquer that I don't like is that when you choose Conquer, you're going down a tree that is an attack speed tree. And so basically you have to pick a champion that synergizes with attack speed. So that rules out tons of champions. Another issue I have is the resolve tree, and I believe Grasp is really strong on certain champions in certain matchups, but if you're not in a melee versus melee matchup at top lane, it actually does completely nothing for most of the game. And the only other alternatives are Aftershock and Guardian, which you can't even proc Aftershock with a lot of champions. And Guardian, you can't even use it at top lane because you're not laning with anyone. Which leads me to the only real alternative to this problem is that when you're laning a ranged champion as a tank, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just go Inspiration first and then Resolve because I want Unsealed Spellbook. And Unsealed Spellbook isn't really all that good anyways, but it's just better than the Resolve alternatives. And as a tank going down the rest of the tree, there's really not much to do that customizes your playstyle. You have some highly situational things like Perfect Timing, Magical Footwear, Hextech Flash Treption, all of which are situational. And like, for example, the boots, like you get boots at 10 minutes, that's a free 300 gold, but it doesn't really customize your playstyle. It's just you're getting some boots. And like, for example, we have Biscuit Delivery, which gives you some extra regen sometimes. And then you have Dematerializer, which lets you push faster, which is probably the only option in this tree. Futures Market is like so boring and stupid, I don't know. And then the last tree, you get some CDR, you get some movement speed, which is actually really good on certain champs. When I say certain champs, there's like one that comes to mind, which is Mundo, and maybe like Singe. And then you go to the Resolve tree, there's literally two options, which are Second Wind, and honestly, everything else is pretty bad. Like if you're against a ranged harassing lane, Bone Plating is not gonna do anything. And the rest of this stuff is so freaking boring to use, and it doesn't feel like there's really any custom ability with these runes. And meanwhile, other champions really excel with things like Airy and things like Conquer. It ends up being there's only like a couple viable champions for each role. I think a big issue League has right now is the lack of variability in item builds. And right now, I think each champion has pretty much the exact same items that it will go in every situation. And the main reason for that, I think, are when they try to add items like Essence Reaver, for example, which imbues your ultimate so you get 50% attack speed and basic attacks refund, 20% of remaining non-ultimate cooldown. The issue with that is that it costs 3,200 gold and it gives you highly situational stuff like basic attacks refund, 1% you're missing mana, which is completely useless on most champions. The Essence Flare is situationally good, but like the 300 mana, the 70 attack damage, and the 20% CDR for 3,200 gold aren't necessarily that good for a lot of champions. So really what ends up happening is there's only like a couple different champions that will ever get Essence Reaver. And like as a top laner, I would never even think about building this item because it's so much money for a lot of stats that I care nothing about. I do think the passive is really cool where you get the Essence Flare after you cast your ultimate, but I can't invest 3,200 gold into that item for that passive. I think it would be really cool if you could get an item that had the passive effect of Essence Flare, but only costs like 1k, and that way you could buy it like relatively early, and it would just open up different types of things you can do. I think Stormrazor is another example of an item that you would never see any top laner go because it just costs so much gold. And yeah, the proc is cool, but at the same time, you're not gonna invest 3,200 gold for 75 attack damage, 30% attack speed. Like, you don't want those stats on like most champions. And so really the item is only open for certain ADCs like Jhin, for example, who really does well with the item. But like most champions don't care about the item, and I think that's the problem with League right now, is that like everything is so meta that it ends up feeling like you're playing chess, where like both teams have the exact same pieces. And one thing that recently happened is people started double jungling and funneling gold into one person, and Riot pretty much immediately came back and nerfed the jungle item so that now if you have the highest total gold amount on your team, lane minions reward 10 less gold per kill, which means that as a jungler now, say you want to go gank a lane, you get the kill, and you want to help push the lane out and do a little jungle attacks, you can't actually do that anymore, because if you have the highest amount of gold and you take lane minions, you're getting literally no gold for it, so it's just not efficient. And the thing that really bothers me is that when the double jungle strategy came out, the gold funnel strategy, instead of letting people adapt to it, Riot just completely decided to destroy the strategy. Like, it's deleted now, and I thought it opened up a potential for different types of playstyles that were actually pretty cool. And personally, I think the main issue with the jungle is the jungle item. I don't think it needs to even be in the game. Personally, what I think they should do is just nerf the jungle and remove the jungle item completely and make the jungler play like a normal person. If they want to go to the jungle and they want to farm up like that, they can. or if they want a dual lane top, they can as well. And I really like what Dota has done, where they don't have a jungle item and there's no meta that's really strictly enforced. And if you have a jungler, he'll start out in the lanes, and then it's up to him to eventually branch out into the jungle, or you can opt for going for more of a lane pressure type of playstyle, or you can try lane. There's tons of different playstyles you can do. And again, you guys would be like, oh, Dota's a dead game, blah, blah, blah. But I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that Dota is doing that League can learn from. And I think League has a really extremely bad track record of balancing the game. Going back to even like season 1, for example, where in my strategy, they nerfed everything about the strategy, including the champion, which wasn't even overpowered to begin with. And the nerfs are done by somebody that has absolutely no idea about the strategy. Like, they're so ignorant about it. I think a lot of the Riot balancing team doesn't even play the game anymore. And I feel like I'm playing a game that is literally being designed by people that don't care about the game at all. I think the game designers should be the people that are actually playing the game on a daily basis, or at least they should be getting a lot of feedback from the people that are playing the game on a daily basis. And it doesn't really feel like they are. So yeah, anyways, that's all I got for you guys in this video. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.